Hello, everyone. Welcome to Live from Planet Hex. I am Andrew Hort, and on this episode, we're going to talk about comics. Hooray! I love comics. Some of you may know me as a comic book writer, others may know me as a dashed old bald dork who used to work in a comic shop many millions of years ago. I worked in a comic shop in Sheffield for 9 years. I look a bit more human now. Fantastic. Excuse the red eyes. I've got children, so yeah, there's a lot of red eyes going on. Turn that down. So yeah, we've got hey Paul. I've got hey Paul Mosky here. It's good to see people in the live chat. Please do pop into the live chat. If you want anything or say anything, you're more than welcome to pop in and do that. So I did work in a comic shop for 9 years back in Sheffield. I'm in Nottingham now, which is it is what it is. I do miss those the comic shop days sometimes. Sometimes I don't because I'm in a far better place mentally, physically, and relationship-wise now. But yeah, I've always loved comics since being a small child. I began, of course, like many people in the UK, with the Beano and the Dandy, Beezer, Whizzer and Chips, Topper, all the old Beano and Dandy style comics, you know, normal comic strips, entertaining comic strips aimed at a younger audience. Now, my boys love the Beano now. I'm so pleased that the kids love the Beano. I'm so pleased about that. After that, I started to discover things like Eagle and 2000 AD, which 2000 AD was a huge turning point. Now, I don't have any 2000 ADs with me to hand, but I do have some of the collected editions that I got straight away when I got into 2000 AD and discovered Judge Dredd. I was sold. I loved Dredd. I loved I loved Mega City 1. I loved all the insane things around Mega City 1 and everything in the 2000 AD universe. That whole sort of very British, very kind of pessimistic, I guess, comic book storytelling. So with Just Dredd, I love Dredd. I love Dredd. I love how blunt he is. I love how humorless he is, but just that let all the other characters, Judge Giant, Judge Anderson, and the citizens of Mega City 1 itself, they carried the humor, and Dredd covered all the action stuff. Of course, Judge Anderson was another big one I got into there through 2000 AD. Now, what fascinated me about Judge Anderson was that, unlike Dredd, of course, she did have the humor and the wisecracking, but she also had lots of battles with things like the Dark Judges. And who didn't love the Dark Judges? They are so cool. Which that opened me up to other 2000 AD strips like Nemesis the Warlock and Zenith and things like that. At the time, there was also, there was a boom in other British comics such as things like with Martial Law and Tank Girl, I guess, a little later in the 90s. As well as 2000 AD and the Dredd stuff. That was around about the time I fell in love with. Oh, hang on, getting ahead of myself. There's one more 2000 AD story I want to talk about, as well as Dredd and things like that. One that a lot of people don't seem to remember that fondly, or if at all, was Armored Gideon. Now, the things that people generally remember from 2000 AD would be Dredd and Anderson and ABC Warriors, Mean Machine, and things like that. But I absolutely fell in love with Armored Gideon. Now, this was a story about a dude that gets sucked into a universe which is entirely populated by giant monsters having monster robots having enormous battles and yelling annihilate and obliterate with utterly crazy art, full of demented visuals, and those scary visuals pulled me in a lot as well. Now, aside from the original comics like those, I got into a lot of the tie-in publications. I've always loved tie-in stuff, things like Transformers and Ghostbusters, but even things that weren't quite so popular, such as Supernaturals comes to mind, and things like Mask and all that sort of thing. They taught me a lot about storytelling. They were punchy, they were to the point, and you got a lot of bang for your buck, or your pound, or your pence. Bear in mind, some of these were only pennies when I started. So of course, things like that would eventually lead me on to discovering American comics. So I went to my first exposure. I was always aware of things like Batman, Superman, and things like that. But when I first went to the Sheffield Space Centre on the Wicker back in Sheffield, I discovered what I'd been after all along. So there was the Sheffield Space Centre, and there was Nostalgia and Comics on Matilda Street in Sheffield, which eventually became Sheffield's Forbidden Planet. But it was in places like that that I discovered a certain group of characters that just pull me in instantly. And if you're going to have really good first exposure to something, you're going to have the good stuff. So it was X-Men was my first huge comics love affair. I joined X-Men as a reader with the beginning of the 90s X-Men, the gold cover, generally one that sold like a bajillion copies. So for me, that's my X-Men team: Wolverine, Cyclops, Grey, Beast, Gambit, and Jubilee. And I'll get onto the dynamic between Wolverine and Jubilee in a little bit. But the X-Men comics were massively influential on what I wanted to do and how I wanted things to play out. I always loved the team dynamic of books. I didn't really get on with the Avengers at that point, because the X-Men were a bit more relatable in how they were portrayed. And some of my favorites were all around the 30th anniversary. So yeah, I know the 90s comics come in for a lot of hassle, but that was my era. So I do have a lot of fondness for the 90s comics, despite their many flaws, and despite the many pouches that Rob Liefeld would draw on things. So yeah, the 30th anniversary, with the holograms on the cover. There's Uncanny X-Men. There's Wolverine. No 3D Wolverine on there. X-Men itself. Who's on that one? That's Gambit throwing his cards on that one. And X Factor, which I pretty much got into because it was available on the weeks that the X-Men titles weren't, the main X-Men titles. And of course, X-Force. I latched onto X-Force quite a bit. I was a young teenager and I loved seeing Cable with enormous guns, and the outlandish, more sci-fi themed stuff that they would get into there. Now, a big part of my interest in comics, US comics of an early age, was that the fact that they were so hard to come by in the UK, and they featured stuff that people didn't know about and hadn't heard of. So one of the big watershed moments was when the X-Men cartoon started airing. It started airing in the UK first on Sky TV, so not everyone else could see it, because it was on satellite TV. But yeah, the X-Men cartoon started. It was awesome. People started circulating VHS tapes of it at school. I remember my school people did circulate tapes of X-Men cartoons. I mean, can you imagine that? Tape trading now. You just send someone a WhatsApp with a link to something. But yeah, those cartoons were even got adapted into the US format comics as well as X-Men Adventures. I was sold on that. Now, for a little while, I did delve into the old the Image sort of stuff, just because of it was attractive to kids of that age at the time. There were other things going on in the comic scene, like excuse me, things like the death of Superman and his subsequent resurrection as 4 different characters. Here are the die-cut covers of the Reign of the Superman storyline. So yeah, there was Cyborg Superman, the Eradicator, Superboy, and Steel came back, all the a resurrected Superman. Of course, that wasn't the case. I won't spoil it, because it was only like 1993, so people still may not be aware of it. But around that time, I discovered Image Comics, and the huge muscles and the enormous guns, and all that, the mayhem of the Image Comics. I think I got to a point in life where I just wanted to check out something that had lots of explosions in it and a bit less pesky characterization. Bah, characterization. Who needs it? But that was that was a stupid point in my comics reading. So I'd moved on from things like Silver Sable and Iron Man and the many other Marvel and DC titles I was reading. I moved on to things like Image Comics, which with titles such as Stormwatch, the original Stormwatch, not the super adult version with a severed penis in the first issue that came back. You know, it was very of its time. It was 90s. It was extreme. But it ended up being quite light on story. Granted, there were things like there's some things that bridge the gap between the characterization of Marvel with the look of Image. So things like the Ultraverse comics, so things like Hardcase and Prime and Mantra and stuff like that. But after a little while of going through those, I realized that something was missing from the stuff I was buying. I noticed that it didn't take very long to read the a lot of the Image titles that I was buying, a lot of the big noisy things, the huge guns, lots of pouches, and so on. So I on the next time I visited my comic shop that I would go to, which incidentally I ended up working in, I discovered a certain title from a publisher called AC Comics. And it was this title, Femforce. So always published by the independent AC Comics, formerly known as Americomics, which is founded by Bill Black. Hey, Bill, I hope you're well, dude. Yeah, it was a full-on traditional superhero title, and now that's exactly what I wanted. But it had the character interplay of like the X titles and the things that had attracted me to the X-Men, and it had, of course, it had ladies in it. I was a teenage boy. Don't judge me. But those ladies were very well drawn as characters, not just the arts. The art's glorious in these, fabulously traditional superhero style art. I'll get to that issue in a moment. And they never felt exploited to me. It never felt just. It never felt like it was just about what the ladies looked like as She-Cat versus Iron Jaw. Love Iron Jaw. It never felt like it was just about what the ladies looked like. There was always something going on. There was a threat they needed to work out, something dreadful going on. There were recurring villains and so on. And I really loved it. At one point, there was going to be a live-action movie, and that was around the era that they started putting actresses they would like to have appeared in a Femforce live-action movie on the covers. Now, one day, once upon a time, I received a letter in the mail, an actual letter. And that letter was from, I think it was from someone called Bob. I do apologize if I haven't remembered that correctly. He'd sent a letter saying, "Oh, I saw your letter in Femforce 68, and I know you'd had trouble with getting hold of the issue. Just wanted to let you know it's in there." I was like 15. I was like, "Oh my god, I had a letter in Femforce," and of course, this is in the days where comics published your address. So this is way before email and social networking and things like that. So if I go to the letters page, and you see, where am I? Just there. That is my childhood address, which is no longer my address, and my name. And that is a letter I had published at the age of 15 in Femforce 68. So if any readers of Femforce go and find issue 68, the one with Night Vale, Spellbound on the front. By Spellbound, she's probably listening to Susie and the Banshees. So I like to think anyway. If you go there, check out the letters page, you can find my letter there complaining about the availability in UK comic shops of Femforce. Now, I never told the owners of the comic shop I ended up working for. It was that comic shop that I had previously complained about in print as a teenager. But hey, as I'm sure some people who are watching this would be aware, the people that ran that comic shop didn't really pay a lot of attention to the people working there anyway. But anyway, so yeah, Femforce was there. I found myself returning to the Marvel stuff, and in particular, I liked one pairing in particular that really got me, that really caught hold of me, which was Wolverine and I see you, Paul. We were complaining about the availability of Femforce in comic shops in the US as well. I can understand that, man. I can understand completely. It was a weird time. Things must be really even harder now. I really liked a particular run of Wolverine. So it was late 60s, 70s of the Wolverine comic. And what I really enjoyed was the interplay between Wolverine and Jubilee. And Jubilee fast became my favorite X-Men character, favorite Marvel character. And I still got a real soft spot for the character because she was very relatable. Her powers sucked a bit. She wasn't very strong or fast, but she had a lot of humor. She had a lot of personality to her. And that was really, really important in the development of my love for comics. And then I went on to follow Jubilee into when she eventually left the X-Men in Generation X. Now, this is such a product of the 90s. Check out this foil cover. Entirely foil wraparound cover. And I loved Generation X because it did feel like, in a way, that X-Men had been given another chance to start over. And they had a lot of interesting characters in it that really hadn't been seen before, like Skin with his extra skin, which was his superpower. There's Jubilee, who had her, her fireworks and some form of latent telekinetic ability that never really manifested all that well. And there was also Chamber. I was a big fan of the Chamber character because he was kind of rock and roll, he was a bit goth, and it tortured because he could never remove the scar from his face because it would release all the huge amounts of energy that were inside him. It was a bit like Cyclops and his glasses, but grunge. This was the alternative rock era, so there was a lot of grungy stuff going on there. But that took me back into the land of Marvel, and I really enjoyed Generation X for a good chunk of its run. I think I got through most of its run, most of the original run, really enjoying it. It seemed to get a little bit toned down towards the end. I tried other things that were in a similar vein, such as Gen 13. Of course, that was quite blatantly. I can't remember whether it was like which one was first. It's a bit of a Deep Space Nine Babylon 5 issue where one inspired the other, or one was stolen from the other, or vice versa. I'm not entirely sure which one came first. I think Gen 13 was originally going to be called Gen X, I think. And some promo material, some ads in comics were showing it as Gen X. But then Marvel said, hang on, the X is ours. What are you doing? As time wore on, you move on in your taste. But I always maintained a love for these characters, as well as a lot of the other things I enjoyed. Like Silver Surfer. You can never go wrong with Silver Surfer. I would revisit X-Force and X-Factor, but moved away from things like that when they got a bit too late 90s, early 2000s. Like when X-Factor was, when X-Force came back as like the kitsch version. I didn't get on with that. That wasn't my sort of thing. X-Force to me will always be like, Cable, Feral, and so on. The thing that followed the New Mutant, the title, the version of the title that came after the New Mutants. As I moved on from that, I started to move out into things that were a bit more niche. Once I was working in a comic store, I discovered the joys of more indie titles or things that weren't solely superhero flavored. Strangers in Paradise. I love Strangers in Paradise. Liberty Meadows. I love Frank Cho's work. I've always loved Frank Cho's work since the moment I saw it, and I loved Liberty Meadows. If you've never read Liberty Meadows, I wholeheartedly recommend it. It's full on Frank Cho style, but it's about a lady and a gent who work in like an animal hospital or like an animal respite home, animal care center of some form. I must revisit it, and all of the animals are Disney-esque characters who get up to all kinds of vaguely rude mischief. But also, I really enjoyed things such as like more niche titles such as PvP, Dog Tower by John Kovalic, who a lot of people will know as the guy that illustrated Munchkin, and things like that. Then I found myself veering away back into things like Deity, which was published by Hyperworks originally, and their spin-off series, things like Cat's Eye, Saint Angel, which gave me the visual punch of Image Comics, but with a sort of, I don't know, skate punk sort of aesthetic, a lot, as well as a huge anime influence, manga influence, and lots of big battles. But again, after that, I think that's when I sort of moved away from comics. I was surrounded by them all the time at the comic store, and when you're surrounded by something, you do tend to lose the edge of what you love after a while. Bear in mind, I was there 9 hours a day, 10 hours a day sometimes, surrounded by these things, constantly being asked about Chucky dolls. Sorry, flashbacks to the comic shop, as a lot of people that were there will know the term "how much are your Chucky dolls" was uttered about 1 billion times a day. I still remember the prices of most of them. So yes, there was the NECA one at $34.99. There was the full size one at $39.99, or there was the talking version at $49.99. No, we didn't have any of the Movie Maniacs ones left. No, I won't reduce them at any time, and no, you can't try them. I think that covers everything. But yeah, that still gives me twitches thinking about those damn Chucky dolls. While I was at the comic shop, and people were and my life was surrounded by comics and superheroes all day, every day, I found myself moving away from that sort of title again into things like Garfield, Peanuts, and newspaper strips. I got a great deal of pleasure out of those because they were just completely different to what I was surrounded with all the time. I came back to it in a big way when I discovered a title called Death, The High Cost of Living, written by Mr. Neil Gaiman, illustrated beautifully by Chris Bachalo. Check that out. How 90s is that? Alice in Chains advert. Alice in Chains advert. Love Alice in Chains. And this was a game changer for me. It was introspective, it was very involved, and it was kind of heartbreaking in a lot of ways. The Death and High Cost of Living, as beautiful as it is, spin-off from the Sandman universe, it is heartbreaking. It's trying just to view death having a one day on Earth. Eventually, I moved away from comics entirely. I joined bands, played in bands, didn't really have the disposable income for much of a buy pile at all. Dabbled in it while I was still working in the comic shop, and then eventually, when I left there and moved to Nottingham, I dabbled in it a bit more here and there with comic shops like Page 45. Hello, Page 45, you rule. And Forbidden Planet here, and Mondo Comico, and things like that. But at the time, I was working in I had different day jobs, but I was working for Powerplay Rock and Metal magazine as well. And towards the end of my time with that, about a year before I finished at Powerplay, I was thinking, I wonder if Femforce is still going. And I found a couple of Femforce back issues in where was it? It was Oxfam, the Oxfam bookshop, just off Market Square here in Nottingham City Centre. They Oxfam bookshop there. They have a huge comic selection, and I found a couple of kind of recent back issues of Femforce. Oh my God, it's still going! And why something I really appreciate about it is that it still had the original numbering. It hadn't been reinvented. There hadn't been like an Ultimate Femforce reinvention with the title. It was still as it was, although it was in black and white. So I shot an email to Mark Hike at AC Comics. So would you have any use for a Stardust script? I've covered this in another video of mine, but I will recount it here just for consistency. Would you have any room for a 4-page Stardust script? And I said I've had a letter in Femforce actually about history with the title. If you look at the letters page in issue 68, I'm there. You know, I do have history with this. I'm writing now. I'm working for a magazine. I'd love to have something in Femforce, even if it's just once. And Mark said, yeah, okay, and let's send some ideas over, and we discussed some ideas, and kaboom! Ended up with the script in there. So that was the Rage of Traxxas, where I introduced the super villainess Traxxas, who was trying to destroy Stardust. The 4-page script, I had no idea what I was doing. I was putting way too much on each page. It ended up being extended to 7 pages by Mark. It's just the same script. He just moved everything over onto more pages, and that was it. That was my start in writing comics, and I've had some great times with it. So I always love writing for the main Femforce characters. Here's Femforce 176. I love writing stories for the main Femforce characters, but I also really appreciate that AC would let you bring in some new ideas of your own. There's a great story. I have a lot of love for this one as well. Stardust story, illustrated in a wonderfully animated style by Scott Schreiber. I hope you do that. But also in that issue, a Sea Cat story, which had the debut of my character, Violet Shadow. So, where are you? There we are. The Sea Cat story, Beware the Violet Shadows. And that's where Violet, a character I absolutely adored creating, got her start. At first she's against She Cat, and then they end up working together. I loved it that I still love it that AC Comics are more than willing to give people a chance. So artists, writers, and so on, they're really good people, and they really know what they're doing. They totally know what they're doing. So as well as the Femforce comics themselves, they also gave me the chance to have Violet Shadow title of our own. I'd love it if Violet Shadow would come back sometime in AC Comics, so I could at least finish her arc. So that contains all the Violet Shadow stuff to date, and it's awesome pinup of Violet by Stephanie. These were given away with issue 182 of Femforce. When AC moved back into color, they asked me if I wanted to script the start of a new series. So I wrote them the script for the first issue of Superbabes, title taken from the 90s role-playing game based around Femforce, which is awesome. As well as that, around 2016, I managed to get in the Judge Dredd magazine with a story called Tower of Skin, where I had Dredd and Anderson facing off against the Dark Judges. That was so cool. And for charity, I got to write the Captain Noise comics, which were sold at the Rocking Children events here in Nottingham. Abuse kids with autism, and a lot of very valuable charities for children. So yeah, that's the early years of my comics, right up to the present day, with the stuff I'm doing now. I've been doing in recent years. I'm looking forward to getting some more plots off to AC. I've got a bunch bubbling over. One of them starring Tara. I do love Tara. Tara's a fun character. Tara, for those of you who aren't aware, is a jungle adventurer. And in one story, Beneath the Castle Grounds, I think it was called, I asked the Heights if I could bring her to Nottingham, if I could ship Tara over to Nottingham for a story here. So if you look up a Femforce story called Beneath the Castle Grounds, it actually features Nottingham Castle. So Nottingham Castle is real. The opening illustration on the splash page was of the real castle, and there are tunnels under it. There are actually tunnels all over the place underneath Nottingham. There's a network of them. I want to have a tour around those and see if there are any giant mutant rat skeletons, which is what I put in that story. But yeah, please leave me a comment below, drop me a message somewhere, and tell me about your experience with the comics that you got started with. What issue was that? I will find out for you, dude. Or ask what issue that was. I'll find out. I can't quite remember which number it was, but I will drop you a message on the Femforce group. If you look at for those that aren't a member, the AC Comics and Femforce group on Facebook is one of the nicest groups you will ever encounter. It's cool people doing cool things. I'll drop you a message on there. I'll in a little while. I'll go and find that. But it's a story I'm really proud of, and takes place right here in Nottingham, in a real place. But yes, drop me a message somewhere on the socials. I have many of the socials, and let's talk comics. And thank you for joining me for this episode of Live from Planet Hex in the Geek Corner of Castle Haunt. My wife's downstairs doing the family quiz of the week, and I've enjoyed this. I'm not big on quizzes, but I've enjoyed spending some time with you guys, as I always do. So thanks for joining me for this second episode of Live from Planet Hex. I will check you again very soon. Bye.